In this video, we're going to take a look at how to model complex shapes using Fusion 360 solids. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to take a look at modeling something using solid bodies only. Now, we've talked a lot about forms on this channel, we've talked about surfacing a bit, and we really don't do much with solid bodies, but that doesn't mean that you can't create complex shapes with them. So what we have here, and then in the description of the video, you can download the data set that includes just 2 canvas images. You don't have to use these are just generic sunglasses that I took a picture of. But if you want, you can take a picture of your own sunglasses and apply the same technique to whatever you're doing. Now, a couple of things that we should first note and understand is that these canvas images are both calibrated to be the same size, but it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just going to use it as a rough guidance. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that they are centered about at the origin. That's going to be important because when we start to create our curves, we want tangency across that midline because we're only going to do half of the work. Also, we want to make sure that, again, they are scaled to the right size, and that's going to be helpful for you to make sure that one of the images is the same as the other. Now, if you want to just, scale them to whatever size you want, that's perfectly fine. Obviously, this picture isn't perfect. It's a little bit twisted, but it'll give us a good idea. So to get started, we are going to be using only solid tools. That's not to say that you can't do this with other methods. We certainly could do this with forms. We could do this with surface bodies, but the solids are going to be a bit easier for a lot of people to understand. So the first thing we want to do is we want to sketch our shape from the front. So I'm going to start a new sketch. I'm going to select my front plane. And I like to begin first by creating my mirror line. So in this case, I'm going to use a line tool from that origin point, and I'm going to come down to where the nose piece is. I'm going to hit escape. And in this case, I'm going to turn it into construction. You can also do that with X on the keyboard. Now, throughout this tutorial, I am not going to be spending a bunch of time dimensioning everything. I think it is important, but we are going to be using splines, and it's going to be a bit trickier for us to fully dimension things with splines, and it's going to take a bunch of time. Not to say that it can't be done, but it's not going to be worth our time in this video. Next, I'm going to create another line over here, and this is where the pivot is for the earpieces of the sunglasses. And again, I'm not going to worry too much about this being perfect. I just want to make sure that it is a vertical line, and then the rest can be splines. Now, when we're thinking about splines, there are 2 different types of splines that we can use, the fit point or the control point. Now the control point, I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit. The control point has an external cage very similar to our box display in our forms. Now the fit point spline, the points are actually going to lie directly on the spline. Now there are a couple of reasons why I would choose one over the other. I find that the box control is a bit easier to get smooth curvature. And the fit point is easier if you've got multiple splines that you need to intersect in the middle, because we don't have a point necessarily that we can use as a reference if we're creating sketches from multiple directions. Having a vertice somewhere along that spline can be helpful. So that's one of the reasons why I might go that direction. Another reason that you might go with the fit point spline is that it can be easier, especially when you're starting out, to figure out the curvature that you want here. So for example, I can create a couple points. What I'm going to do is take this midpoint line, I'm going to make it horizontal. Again, we're looking at the importance of mirroring across the horizontal. And then I can just sort of move some of these points around until I'm happy with the shape. I will always select the spline and turn on my curvature combs to make sure I don't see anything that is wildly inconsistent with the shape I want. So here you can see we have an inflection point. That is okay because we're changing the direction of curvature. We're coming up from this midline and then we're changing to go from convex to concave. So I would expect to see a cross right there, and that's fine for me. What I don't want to see is any jagged lines. So if I increase the scale of this, I want to make sure everything is nice and smooth. I'm going to cancel so it's not visible here. And I'm going to repeat that process. We're going to do it down here. And again, I'm just going to use as few points as possible. Now it's going to be important, as few points as possible to create the shape that we want. And we can always add or remove points later. but it's going to be important that we don't over constrain this. So again, at the midline, I'm going to go horizontal. Over here, what I want to do is I'm going to make sure that this is also horizontal, or at least close to it. It looks like it is in the picture, so I'm just going to go ahead and use horizontal there. Then I'm going to hit escape off my constraint, and then I'm just going to play around with the weight of the tangency handles at the start and the end. But then on the internal points, I never want to activate the handles if I don't have to. Each of these points has its own handle, but right now it's at what I would consider a minimal stress position. So it's not inducing any wild curvature. If I take this handle and I start to twist it and stretch it out, and I take a look at the curvature combs, things start to get a little crazy. So what I'm going to do is Control Z undo before I ever activated that handle and make sure that it is nice and smooth. I am going to take a look at the curvature combs. Again, we've got our inflection point here and here. That's what I would expect to see. At the bottom, it looks like it's flattening out. So if you want a nice, consistent, rounded shape, what you would want to see here is that the thickness or the width, the scale of that curvature comb stays consistent. For us, it kind of flattens off and then changes direction here, so this might be okay. But this is a case where I'm going to leave the curvature combs on, and I'm going to play around with these points, moving them around until I'm happy with the result. So this one probably gets pulled up a little bit. And what I want to see is I want to see the curvature comb somewhat mimic the shape. So we're going to use this as the radius of curvature. So this little line here, the distance away, is going to indicate how tightly that transition is. So up here where we've got a really tight transition where we're hitting this little corner point, you can see that the curvature comb line is really long. That means that it's a very tight transition. We see the same thing over here, not quite as long, but we can see a tight transition. Down here, it's very gradual, and that's what I would expect to see. Now, in some cases, you might want to select one of these and hit delete and see if you can get away with even fewer curvature control points. So here I can hit delete, and I'm just going back and I'm doing undo just to see what things look like. And just make sure that I need all of these points. Because again, we want to minimize the number of points that we have. So we're going to play around with just moving these around a little bit, trying to match the shape. And once we're happy with that, I can select the spline again and turn the curvature comb back off if we want. Now that we have everything here, we need to make the decision if we're going to mirror this thing as a solid or if we're going to do it as, or I'm sorry, if we're going to mirror the thing as one whole body or if we're going to mirror the sketch. So in this case, I'm going to actually go back and turn that construction off. This gives me a complete profile here. The other thing that we want to consider is the lens shape itself. Now the lens shape the lens will get made after the fact, but we want to account for that in this solid body. So I'm going to do another spline. I'm going to start in this corner, and I'm just going to work my way around. If you ever get to a point where it's trying to snap to, let's say, a horizontal, just hold down the control key if you're on a PC, and it'll override those temporary constraints. And then once you get back around to the end, you'll need to let go of that control key because we want it to go back to that original point and have tangency there. We're going to hit escape, and I'm just going to move these points around until I'm happy with the shape. And one of the things that you want to think about is the consistency between the inside and the outside. And even if you're not matching the image, you want to make sure that you're not making a section too thick or too thin. So it's a good idea to just play around with these vertices and make sure that you are staying relatively consistent. That might mean moving them around the shape in order to get that correct. You can always turn the canvas off too and just take a good look at your sketch and see if that looks like the shape you're going for. Now, I do want to mention that we're not going to be modeling the entire set of sunglasses. We're only going to be working on the frame, maybe the lens, but mostly the frame, because the process is going to be the same no matter what shape you're doing. This is just going to help you understand how we approach it. So now that we have this sketch, I'm going to finish, and then I'm going to hide it. So we have to do this again, and we have to do this again from the top. Now, we're not going to be completely done with this. We do want to look at it again, but I'm going to use a sketch from the top to define the same thing, in this case, for the shape of the sunglasses from the top. Now, this is where things get a bit tricky. The canvas is actually rotated a little bit, so I might want to edit the canvas. and try to rotate it. And the first thing that I want to do is make sure that the angle of the sunglasses is relatively flat. Looks like maybe -2 degrees will get me there. And then I want to make sure that the center point is still at the origin. That's going to be important for our mirror. So once I'm happy with editing the canvas, now we can go ahead and start to sketch this. Now, as opposed to the front view, this one's a little bit different because this set of sunglasses is not straight down as we're looking through it. You can see that the bottom of the glasses is sort of rotated back a little bit. And you can also see that we've got these nose pieces here. Now, these are going to be tricky. It's something that we're going to have to think about how we're going to approach this. But we need to at least get started creating the top section of the glasses. Then we'll deal with the rest a little bit later. So once again, I'm going to use a spline and just kind of mimic the shape of the top of this. And over here, I'm just going to kind of come off to the side. This body can be bigger than it needs to be. But again, we want to be mindful of mirroring across that midline. And that's going to be an important aspect of this design. I'm going to move these points around. Again, you can turn on Curvature Combs and make sure that nothing is wildly different between what you were expecting to see. And then we're going to do another spline from here. And if the shape is the same, sometimes you can get away with offsetting. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of mimic where those vertices are. And then again, make this one horizontal, so that way when we mirror, everything is okay. And I also want to close this off. So I'm going to do a vertical line here. Doesn't have to be vertical, but just for my own peace of mind, I like to make the lines vertical or horizontal whenever they're going to be sort of ending this shape. Okay, so now that we have this shape from the top, we have to consider the nose piece, because the nose piece is going to be a tricky aspect of this. Now, a couple ways that we could do this. We could deal with the nose piece after the fact. We could try to model it, mold it, and add it onto the body. However, that's going to be a little bit difficult to do with these solids. Now, if we were doing sort of a piecemeal design using one surface at a time to get that to work, that might be fine. But in this case, it's probably going to be better for us to try to loft the shape to include that nose piece. Now, this is where actually having a pair of glasses in front of you is going to be helpful. I think we can all pretty much identify that there is a bump out here, and it is relatively smooth compared to the glasses. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of offset planes. And what I want to do is I want to create the same sort of shape that we have with that top sketch. As we're going down through the glasses, I want to incorporate that nose piece. So I'm going to put one down about, let's see, about 0.5. That's right where that nose piece transition starts. And then I'm going to create another offset plane. And we're going to go, let's see, all the way to the bottom of the glasses. But let's go another 1/2 inch and then maybe do one more. So I'm going to use my right-click marking menu and just repeat that offset, and we'll just go down until we're completely at the bottom. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but we want to make sure that we're at least outside of the shape that we're working on here. Okay, now that we have those, I'm going to go to my second plane and create a sketch. Now, this is where things get a little tricky because you have to start really thinking in 3D how this shape is going to begin. Now, I'm going to assume the center portion of the sunglasses stays completely vertical. This is where the nose piece sort of connects. You can see that over here, it comes back a little bit, and that's something that we can certainly account for. However, for this video, that's going to be a little bit trickier to deal with. So I'm not going to worry too much about that just yet. I really want to focus on this shape. So as we're going down through the sunglasses, if you think about slicing them at these planes, we would want to start to see a spline that carries up and over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this vertical line, this spline, and this vertical line and project them. So we're going to go down to project, include, project. And then for the upper spline, I am going to redraw this. So we're going to use a spline. Again, we're going to maintain that horizontal relationship here. We're going to have to come back and add that. But then we want to start to bump out where we think that nose piece is. And then we want to carry on with the rest of the shape until we're happy with it. Whoops, I hit escape, so I have to redraw that. If any of you are coming from another CAD program like SolidWorks, oftentimes when you're creating these splines, if you hit escape, it ends the spline. In Fusion, you have to hit the green check mark to OK that and then escape. So we're going to go ahead and drag that to that endpoint. I'm going to make sure that we get the shape roughly right, which means that I'm going to have to pull these vertices around. And I want to make sure that, again, this handle here is horizontal. That's going to be important for us. We want to make sure that we are able to mirror this and that we have curvature continuity across there. And then just simply play around with these points. We might not need all of them, so you can always select and delete some. But what we're looking for is a nice smooth transition. Now, you might be thinking, why didn't we just draw the whole thing? Well, the way that the shape works is it's a fairly smooth transition that ends up happening over time. Now, this isn't the only way to do this. So if you're thinking to yourself, this is way too complicated, I can't possibly think about modeling in this manner, I'm with you because I typically don't model like this. You can also go back after the fact and add that bump. So that is certainly possible, and we can talk about that method as well. It'll be easy enough. We'll take a look at it probably at the end of this video, but we want to at least understand how to do this. So now if I hide the canvas images and we just take a look at the sketches we have, we are basically starting to go from this profile down to this profile. And then we need to carry on to the next plane down, and we need to understand what that looks like as we're going through the glasses. So this is the portion where that starts to taper away. So we're going to create another sketch. And once again, I am going to continue to use the front edge and the vertical edges. So I'm going to select all of these and hit P to project. And then I'm going to redraw this section. Now I'm going to hide my last sketch. I'm going to bring back that canvas image and once again use a spline. Now this time I'm going to go a bit higher. And then again, we want to carry this shape out, come all the way to there, hit the green check mark for OK. And then this handle needs to be horizontal. You do need to be careful. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. If this handle is closer to vertical, it'll automatically go to vertical instead of horizontal. That's obviously not what we want. Now in this case, we can use the handle to try to change the shape, or we can add another point. I'm not going to add another point. I want to keep this as smooth as possible and maybe drag this over a little bit. And I think that looks okay. Now, you notice I'm not spending a bunch of time looking at the curvature combs at this point. I certainly think that you should. It just takes a little bit more time. So I'm not doing it simply based on time. But if you're modeling something, then I would suggest that you do it as well. Now for this last one, I'm just going to go ahead and project the top sketch. And the reason I'm doing that is because that nose piece disappears. It goes away. So what I'm doing is I'm creating that same top profile at the bottom. And again, remember, if you are looking at this image, it does sort of flare out at the bottom, and we're not really accounting for that here. All right, so now that we've got these profiles, the next thing for us to do is we're going to take this front profile and just extrude it. So I'm just going to extrude it backwards. And I'll probably bring it forwards just a little bit, just so I have some extra solid body there to deal with. I'm going to hide that body. And then for these other profiles, we're going to do a solid loft. We're going to go from each profile. And then you can kind of see that nose piece taking shape. Now, again, this is a really difficult way to model and to visualize. But what we're doing is we're taking what's going to be left between these two bodies. And you'll instantly see that I didn't make that top plane tall enough relative to my sketch, but that's okay. I'm going to select it and use press pull and just bring it up higher. Now you'll notice there is going to be a certain point where that doesn't work. If that is the case for you, what you can always do is let's kill that loft. Let's bring all these sketches back and let's create another offset plane. This time we're just going to go up vertically. And then on this, we're just going to project that sketch. So again, we're going to use the same shape here. Take that whole thing, P on the keyboard, and we can project that entire thing up. And now when we do our loft, we'll just start there. So again, we'll come from here, go all the way down through these. And this is going to allow us to make that nose piece shape kind of where we need it. And now if we bring back our other solid body, they should perfectly overlap. All right, so now here's the magic bit, and there's two tools that we can use to make this happen. Well, there's really a couple. In the loft, we could have done an intersect body and just allowed it to intersect directly with the extrude that's there. So that's one way that we can do that. We can do that after the fact using combine and the intersect option and just keeping the overlap between those two. And again, you can kind of see that we would need to tweak the nose piece a little bit. We'll take care of that in just a second. The third option that we have is the boundary fill tool. This one's a little bit trickier to use, but it can make use of surfaces, solids, and planes. And then you need to select the regions that you want to keep. Now, the tricky thing about this is that I found that recently it's kind of hard to click the boxes through other solid bodies. Something happened in one of the updates that makes it really hard to select these. So I've been avoiding that tool lately just because of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back so I have the least number of features in my timeline. I'm going to edit my loft and use it as an intersect, which will give me that solid body. Now, from here, what we can do is we can take a look at the sketches we created, and we can see how they interact with the solid. So what we want to do is we want to find the sketch, probably this one here, and I'm going to modify the sketch, moving this shape. Even though it doesn't match my image, I'm going to move this shape inward. And this is going to affect where that loft is and start to alter the shape of the glasses. Now, again, this is a very tricky way to model because you have to really think about these curves. You have to think about where these shapes are and how these shapes are going to transition. We might need an additional plane in the middle somewhere to make this work. I might need to add another spline point. So I'm going to insert a point here and then move it around and just keep tweaking and playing with the shape until you're happy with it. Now you can see that looks okay. It's probably an okay solution here. But again, it is a much harder way to model. With this design, we can now go to create and mirror. We can take this body. Because that midline was done at the origin, if we mirror this across and I use Control and 4 to hide my edges, I should have perfect curvature continuity across the middle. That little bump is actually there in the glasses. That's how it's designed. So that is all intentional. And at this point, you should also be able to come in and do things like add little fillets if you want. Let's just put a small fillet on that outside lip there. We can maybe even add one to the inside and add one here. So that one looks like it doesn't want to do 0.1, might be okay at a smaller number. Once you get into these sort of complex curves, you're going to start to run into problems when you apply things like fillets. But that is the main way that you can use solid bodies to create a shape like this. Now, as a bonus, I mentioned that we would take a look at another method. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to extrude this again. So I'm going to take this shape and I'll do it two sides just to make sure that I have more than enough solid there. And we're going to extrude the vertical shape. So we're not going to be lofting this time. I'm going to go ahead and do two sides. And once again, we're going to use intersect. So this is going to leave us with that same piece there. So we can hide the sketches. And now, if we want to create that little bump for the nose piece, now there are a couple ways that we can do it. We can simply extrude another piece and we can add some fillets to sort of blend it in. Now, if we were going to do that, the way that that would look is we would extrude that first profile again. So for example, I might extrude this back as a new body. And then from the top, we would extrude, or from the side, we would figure out where we want that nose piece to be. So what I'm going to do is from the side, I am going to show this body here. And I'm going to figure out where I want that nose piece to be. So it's going to be on this edge here, right there. And then what we would do is we would simply just sketch something that kind of matched the shape. So I'm just going to make this little, sort of this little bump out here, and I'm going to connect it with a line. And just pull that in just a little bit. And then what I want to do is I want to extrude this direction. This is not going to be a perfect solution by any means, just so you know, but then what we would do is we would use that same sort of the intersect between these two solid bodies. And this would keep a piece of the design, and we could add that back to this piece. So these two get combined together. And I know I'm going kind of fast here. These get combined together, and then we could use fillets to sort of blend this into the rest of the body if it would allow it. You can see in this case it's not really liking it, but that gets us somewhat of a nose piece. Now, again, it's not perfect, right? Because the nose piece is actually going to taper. It's really more of a curvature continuous form shape. But what we can do again is we can think about a third method. Now, the third method, and probably the one I would use, would be to use surfacing tools. That's a little bit trickier, but that's kind of the way that I would go about this. So I'm going to roll this back, and I'm going to hide those other bodies and assume that we're just left with this piece of sunglasses, right? So this is where we want to work. So the way that I would approach this is I would start by creating a sketch and figuring out where I want that nose piece to be. So for me, I'm going to project, select and hit P to project, select that entire face, and then I want to divide this up where I want that nose piece to be. Now keep in mind that curvature continuity is important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a spline here. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. And then I'm going to try to apply either curvature or smooth continuity or tangency and kind of blend these together. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I want to split the shape up. I want to split the faces, and I want to find a solution that will give me more of that nose piece shape. So then I'm going to go to Modify, and we're going to use Split Face. Faces to split is the back of the sunglasses, and then I can split it with this tool. And if that doesn't work, then oftentimes what we need to do is we need to try maybe to extrude these out as a surface. We'll go back to that last sketch. We'll repeat that. And then oftentimes it'll allow us to use these to split the face. So we'll try it again, split the face. The tool will be this. We'll say okay. We'll repeat it, split the face. Tool will be that. And let's just see if that works. Now that we have this, I can select it and delete it. Now what we're dealing with is a surface body. It's no longer a solid body. So what we can do from here is we can define the shape. So if we just were to try to patch this hole, it would just create a patch that fits in there. But we have this option for an interior rail or point, so we can help define where that curve goes. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create a couple more sketches. So we'll sketch on the front or the back. We want to create a curve that sort of goes through and mimics where the nose piece is. So again, I'm going to use a spline and just kind of rough this out. So that curve is going to be sort of the line of where the nose piece is. And then I need to create one from another direction. So in this case, I'll do it from the side. This time, we need to make sure that it intersects our surface. So I'm going to project, so P on the keyboard, project those. Go to my left view, and then I'll create another spline. Now, if you want curvature continuity, you need to spend a lot more time doing this. I'm not really going to be spending that much time doing this curvature continuity, but just keep in mind that there are a bunch of extra steps that you often need to go through. Then we need to do a third sketch. And I will say that I'm not 100% sure that this is even going to work. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But what we're going to do is an intersection curve. So our spline from the back and our spline from the side. And then we get this curve in 3D. Now, theoretically, that should work as an interior rail. So we're going to give it a shot, and you can see that it does not. Of course it doesn't. All right, so if this is the problem that you're running into, typically what's happening is that intersection point is not, it's not actually on the surface. So it's probably floating not close to that edge. So that means that we need to get it a little bit closer to that edge. That's okay. Let's do a little bit more work and let's make sure that we get this right. So what I want to do is take a look at this, this spline sketch that I have here. And we want to use this to actually divide or split this edge as well. So I'm going to edit this sketch. And I'm going to just bring this all the way through until it goes all the way through and maybe adjust the shape just a little bit. And what I want this to do is I want this to actually go all the way through this face so that I can create a point. I'm going to use this to split a face. This is my tool. And now what that gives me is an actual reference point. So I can still use this in my projected curve, but now when I go to a side view, what we should see is when we project our curve, I'm going to hit P on the keyboard, what we're going to do instead is project this line, and we're going to project this line. That's going to give us two things. It's going to give us a tangency direction, and it's also going to give us an actual point that we can attach to. So now I'm going to take a spline, and I'm just going to sort of draw something, and then we can apply our tangency between the spline and this intersection or that projected edge. So we're going to select that, select this, have some tangency there. We're going to select the spline, select that line, have some tangency, and we'll try this one more time. If this doesn't work, then this part is probably going to get cut out of the video, which you'll never know. But we're going to create one more sketch. Doesn't matter what plane it is, you just, for whatever reason, you need a third sketch in order to do this intersection because you can't do this inside of its own sketch. And then, fingers crossed, we should have a curve that perfectly attaches to those points. So this means if we patch, we can patch this. Our interior rail should now touch the surface. So you can see there, now it's bumping up. Now, if you want to really increase your blood pressure, you can try to push tangency on these edges, and there will likely be a point where it doesn't work. Now, if we scroll down, there's a handful of these. If we keep pushing tangency here, you can just see that the result is not great. It's really not giving us the kind of result that we would expect. So what I'm going to do is group all the edges and just make them connected. And then I could work on blending the rest of that in manually. But again, this process takes a good bit of time because you have to really spend a lot of time with the references. You have to figure out these curves in 3D. But ultimately, this shape, if we knit this or stitch this back together, we now have a solid body. If I bring back the original, I'm going to go ahead and just move this back a little bit. And let's go ahead and mirror this. And let's hide the edges, Control 4. So you can see this one doesn't have curvature continuity going through just because of the way that it was designed. That's okay. We could spend more time with surfaces and get that to work out. Or you can see that the original lofted version, everything is nice and smooth, but it took quite a different approach to create all of those different curves that we're going through. I know this probably wasn't the best approach, but it's always important, I think, as a designer that you understand the different methods that you can apply, because there are cases where the surface method is going to be a much better solution for certain types of geometry, where this lofted version might be easier for you to do on other types of geometry. So understanding that you do have options, especially knowing that most of this was done with solid tools, and knowing that you do have those different choices that you have to make along the way, will maybe help you make a good choice. Now, I think it's important also to note, I mentioned as we were going through this, that it may or may not work. Sometimes you go down a path when you're trying to design and something just doesn't work properly, and you have to be kind of okay with that. You have to just cut your losses and go a different direction. Now, for me, I would likely spend a lot more time building the surface that has to happen back here for this nose piece, rather than doing the different sketch curves and lofts, because that to me is a lot more difficult to sort of visualize in 3D to figure out how that shape is going to go. Doesn't mean that that's true for everybody. Some people might be very good at visualizing that. Some others might really want to work individually on these faces. So these are a couple different approaches. Again, there's obviously more ways that this can be done. If you have another method that you like to use, and again, we didn't even try to do this with forms. It is possible, but we didn't even approach it. But if you have another method that you like to use, feel free to share, add a comment. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.